Okay, so I'm just going to share this PDF screen. Is that correct?
That's one. That's the actual model I can go through. I just want to give you an example. So my group is responsible for modeling business processes within pay. I have a team that uses QualiWare to model anything that we do. So it's not just necessarily systems, but also workflows, which I sent an example of an escalation process, and other things. And what we do ideally is look at the as-is state and then lean it to a to-be state. But generally, just in case you're not familiar with BPMN, BPMN is management and notation, business process model and notation, sorry. It's a graphical representation of a business process and or a business process model. It is a standard, and it's an ISO standard actually, which I did not know, but it is. And the ISO is 19510, so 19510. Although it is maintained by the Object Management Group as a specification. So it is ratified though as a standard for business process modeling, and it's basically a flowchart. I usually term it to the people in my group as Visio on steroids, because most of them understand what Visio does, but they don't necessarily know what QualiWare can do. So I always encourage people when I talk about business process modeling to think of a flowchart, a standard flowchart, and use it for modeling. And the best part of QualiWare, in my opinion, is the ability to drill down into sub-processes, and then even further into, if you want to, we don't go there, but you can go right into tasks and activities and desk drops, etc. My group is limiting to only 5 levels. The 5th level we don't use. So we go from a overview, basically the modeling network, and then we go down to a process, and then we go into the details, activities, swim lanes, etc. I don't want to do procedures. I don't want to do desk drops. I don't want to do anything like that, because to me that's a task and activity that is unrelated to what I'm doing. The benefits of QualiWare is that it's easy to use model, in my opinion. There are 116 elements. You can call them symbols if you want, but there's 116 elements, and QualiWare gives you all those elements, plus you have the ability to use color. You have the ability to change your widths if you want to highlight something, such as a critical path. It's easy for a novice to come in and see, oops, if this breaks, we have a serious issue, or this is important. It's also easy when you're doing leaning to look at where the waste lies, and you can highlight that as well. The benefit of QualiWare for me is it is easy to publish. You can do it through PDF, and once we get PSPC all set up, you can do it through web publishing. So you can actually scroll through the maps and demonstrate each process and sub-process. So I think that's one of the things I can say about QualiWare.
So maybe just a real quick question while we get this together. How do you handle in a repository the as-is and the to-be? Do you change your process, make it a revision change? Do you create new objects? Do you do a naming standard? Or have you not gotten into this yet?
Elizabeth is jumping up and down on me to answer.
I raised my hand.
She raised her hand.
When you said the question.
We have a nomenclature in the way we map things. So we would actually put as is. So if I'm doing, let's say, what I'm showing you, BPMO escalation framework, we would put in brackets as is, which is the proposed process. And then we would map it. So because my repository is shared with Julie, for example, we actually name it PSPC dash PAB or RPS dash, in my case, the name of the process, and then dash as is. Or to be. So it's basically the nomenclature. So when you're scrolling through the repository, I can easily identify Julie's processes versus my processes. And then I have a person who will go through and maintain that, update, delete old processes or ones that have were just test issues or whatever. But essentially, file nomenclature was key to repository management from our point of view, especially since our repository right now is also shared with SSC.
So when I look at it, though, we're looking at some activities and gateways and stuff here.
Yes.
It's those. It's that. It's not the diagram that I was thinking of. It's the stuff in the diagram. How do you handle that?
When we meet with the client, we go through it and we try and I wouldn't say the word dumb it down, but try and bring it to their level so they understand the process flow as they speak it.
No, but picking on advise employee, how do you know that's not the to be or the as is? Because the underlying process could be different depending on your viewpoint.
Correct, because the map is stated as is. So in a to be world, when we remap it, we'd have two separate maps, and then I would know that it's the to be state.
So we advise employees.
So what happens when you want to look back three versions?
We only keep the approved version or final version. So if I'm doing a draft, we change it, and then go back. So it still stays the same. So if it's
So I got an approved version, but I had a previously approved version, and I had a previously approved version before that, and a previously approved version before that. Do you still have access to all those previously approved levels or not?
Not unless they're deleted from the repository, because I try and maintain the most recent approved version, so I don't go back and look in time.
Kevin, in the past, we didn't use the revisions. It is something we want to do moving forward. I can tell you with Julie's maps with real property, I will be using revisions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the past, we didn't do it because we didn't, to be honest, we didn't know. So we were doing the best that we could with what we knew at the time, right? So I will tell you that moving forward with Julie's information, for example, we're getting really close to finishing a whole section called lease in. Once those are approved, they will be locked, and then we'll do revisions moving forward.
Yeah, that's the way to convert from where you are to using the revision capabilities. Yeah.
So maybe just an example, just to kind of go, the advise employee that I see on the screen, there could be two of those, and depending on what diagram it's in, the as is or to be.
Well, you would know if it's as is or to be by the nomenclature up on the box note. But advise employee is an activity, regardless of whether it's as is or to be. The process is we have to advise the employee.
So just a comment.
We use several of them. As you can see, advise employees use several places. So they just reuse the box.
From D&D, just a comment on version control and revisions. So at D&D at QualiWare, we are implementing a quality management system where we have, we do various testing. So we get right down to work instruction, task levels, and activities, and produce different versions of work instruction that is part of a child document that is a higher level business process or business process network. And we have version control all the way down to the sub child documents. What we find works very well is we create the as is, then the to be. But once it's approved, the to be changes year over year or month over month as the process gets consumed and gets modified. So we publish it with versions so that you always have a record of the latest version that's published, but you can always go back to versions that are lower and as a record. So we keep them as records outside of QualiWare. So it's another way that you can do it.
Right. And one of the things we do in our maps is if we have a link or a document that we want, we just indicate that as a little symbol underneath the box, and we link to the website, which could break, I understand that, but we link to those documents, or we say, here is a intake form for a new employee, for example, here's the new employee intake site, and we link there, we say it's an object, and we just indicate it as such. but I don't go to that activity level. I only go to the lowest process level, which is what I map. Because we found that if I go to the activity level, I'd have innumerous amounts of maps.
We're running. We're going to be running about 600 maps in our organization.
Okay, so that's beating me. I'm about 200 right now for pay.
Yeah. No, it's just a different way of doing it. So it's just an example. It's not for everybody, for sure.
Yeah, right. Another thing I did when I was developing maps was every time I'd create a PDF, I'd save it. Just because Kevin's right. Sometimes people go back to the version they had last week, or they didn't like the way that one looked. So can we do the way we did it 2 weeks ago? So I actually used to keep all the PDFs, all the different versions.
And my team, that's a good point. My team, to answer Kevin's questions, it may not be saved in QualiWare that I'm on version 1.4, but in GC Docs, I have all the previous versions.
Right.
Because we create a PDF and say, okay, here's the version, and next one. So I can go back if I need to via GC Docs. But on QualiWare, because I want to maintain my repository as clean as possible, considering that.
So when you're actually in your repository, you're only going to view the current active version. You you explicitly have to go and say, show me previous versions. So that's so it will look clean, but all of the previous versions are still there in the repository. You just have to change the view on your repository explorer or on a particular object to say, show me the previous versions. And to roll back to the previous version, you just change the indicator as to what is the current, the current production level.
Yeah, Brenda's taught me a lot about that.
Well, I didn't know.
No, we didn't know it before.
I just like keeping the most clean version because when you're in a repository currently we
also here. To JR's point, how we do it at CBSA is maybe a little different, or maybe you do it the same way, but I didn't hear anyone articulate in exactly the same way. As far as activities are concerned, like in your case in point, the advised employee, we keep our models, the BPMN models that we are developing, and until they are published, that's essentially in a sandbox. But once we're ready to publish the models, then all the activities need to be interlinked and connected to what we call the reference architecture, where we have a reference activity that we connect all the instances. So advised employee, you see here, it's 5 or 6 times in this model. Mm-hmm. These would actually be linked, each one of them, to the same generic activity in our reference architecture. And in that reference architecture is essentially the as-is state, if you will, it's been vetted, it's been approved, and that's our vetted. Anything else that's to be is what is in our sandbox. Until we publish, it doesn't become our as-is. So that's the way we distinguish the as-is and to be as far as activities are concerned.
Yeah, in QualiWare, everything would be in the one repository. You would have all your previous versions. You would have all your future versions as well, because you could have multiples of them because you have different releases coming down the road. But you would have a pointer that says, this is my current production version. And so that way, when the publisher works, it publishes your current production version. All of your previous versions are still frozen, and your future versions are open for continued development. All your linkages still remain the same, but it's a different. People are used to having different libraries and moving things between them as they change stages. QualiWare's take on it was, it's easier because of all the linkages between content. It's easier just to have it in one repository and point to the current version, but have the other ones there and available.
Right. So I know when, I don't want to talk for Julie, but Julie has a private workspace where they do all their work and modeling, and when they're ready, they promote it up that way.
They promote it to base, and it becomes visible to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. In our case, for PAB, we don't have that private workspace repository. We've actually just done it right from the start in the, well, that's actually a training.
In the repository that was set up for you originally by us.
But
Yeah.
there's a long story behind PSPC and SSC issues, but I won't get into that because that's
We
not my
won't go there right now.
We won't go there right now.
Earl,
maybe-
Earl, we don't have your, for whatever reason, we haven't received your document. So I'm wondering, I mean, it's been good conversation here, but I'm wondering if we can push you're going through this to January. Our apologies for not sort of, I guess, getting it in advance.
I'm just double checking my email. If it went through the gateway, and it has. It was sent at 5:21. But we can. So yeah, I understand that. In that sense, what I was saying is that you don't even have to skip it. I can present it if you wish. But essentially, QualiWare is used for us for business process modeling, and it is not exclusive. Each branch can use
getting it in
okay,
advance.
I'm just double checking my email if it went through the gateway, and it has. But essentially, QualiWare is used for us for business process modeling, and it is not exclusive. Each branch can use the symbols they want. So essentially what we did was we met with TBS because we were processing the same HR to pay transactions, namely actings, terminations, transfers, and union dues. So we want to have a common language between the two organizations, and we knew that the 116 plus and colors include or not included and stuff in QualiWare was way too much for a common parlance. So we squished it down to about 50 symbols or elements, if you wish. And we've used those as our common parlance for the two. The framework that we set up is only in draft. It hasn't been approved by anybody. It was just a common language, and we were just going to show that what BPMN is, most of you know what it is, and how we in Pay use it to draft not only systems, but also things like this, an escalation framework. And my clients, when Elizabeth was working with me, we did major pay upgrades for collective agreement implementations, probably 44 maps there. The new 2018 round that is coming in, which is probably like 60 maps. And then, of course, my colleagues, Julie, and we also have a departmental oversight branch coming on board with QualiWare, apparently, and science and parliamentary precinct, the ones that are looking at the science and infrastructure buildings in Parliament Hill, are also looking at onboarding onto QualiWare as well. So we're probably the guinea pig. We were one of the first to join PSPC, and it has been interesting. I'm glad Kevin talked about the translation issue because my maps are being published in English, and I'm afraid of an OL request coming down saying where's them French. So hopefully I'll be able to translate. Yeah. So I'm glad you talked about that, Kevin.
Yeah. So Earl, I still think there's some value in having, showing the deck that you've got, but why don't we do that in January? Is that okay?
I can push off to January.
We'll be better organized so that we'll have your deck in advance. Normally the presenters, have their, can show their own deck, but I guess with your machine, you can't join the meeting to do that. So
talk to SSC and let me go through the gateway.
No more. Hush.
Kevin, Eric Sheik here. Quick question. Very, very intrigued by the framework that Earl has developed with his team and the folks at, I guess, a combination of PSPC and a few other agencies. Can you share that framework with us?
Yeah, we'll get it from Earl in the next couple of days, share it with everybody, and then we'll make it a discussion point for the January meeting too.
Sure.
Okay.
And maybe if you could forward your slides ahead of the January meeting.
Yeah, we'll do that so that people have it, and then we can use it to generate conversations like this in January.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.